Welcome to the Postgame. I'm Michael Brooks. Thank you, patrons. Thanks to the new people on this expedition. We're moving. We're getting close to that 1K number. Thank each and every one of you so much. And I also need to apologize. There is a problem with the phone system. It could potentially be my fault. I don't know how to figure it out. We have a new computer. It's a whole bunch of boring shit. And I'll make it up to you because... And I usually do. I usually take, I think I'm at like a 95% ratio on taking calls on this show because I like your voices and I appreciate you. The IMs are open and no worries, even though we'll be missing you, which is terrible. We do have for this post game the great Milton Allimadi. He is the publisher of Black Star News. He's an adjunct professor at John Jay College. Writer. Milton, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, man. My pleasure.
Let's just move the mic a little bit closer to the mic. I like the lean back, though.
How's this?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Does that work? Let's work. Thanks so much for being here, Milton.
Hey, my pleasure, man. You do good, sir.
Yeah. I want to say, well, we met in like 2014. Is that right? We met at Arise.
Arise TV.
Arise TV.
Yes.
What happened to Arise?
I don't know, man.
What was Arise? I never even knew what Arise was when I was in it.
Arise was it was a TV was founded by this Nigerian with very deep pockets.
Yeah.
But I don't think he was a journalist. So, you know.
No, he was not.
Folks with deep pockets, when they lose interest, they shift their money somewhere else. So I think that's what happened to Arise.
And they would lose, and they would do, like, I remember I had a period where I was getting booked on there quite frequently. And then I would, like, one time I just out of the blue stopped hearing from them. So I emailed one of the producers, like, you know, I don't know, what did I, yeah. And more honestly, just out of, you know, kind of curiosity. And she was like, oh, we have to, like, leave every couple of months because he just doesn't pay us. So we need to walk out and shut down production because the man literally is not paying us. It was bizarre.
That's a challenge, you know. It's a challenge of journalism, man, you know.
Can you tell people a little bit your story of how you came to be where you are, Black Star News? I think it's very relevant for people to know, and people will know. Patrons will know. Right. Well, Milton, of course, was the lead with us on the expedition of the story of Thomas Sankara, which I know people appreciate a lot.
Yeah. So where should I start? Like
wherever you want. We're in the post game, man. This is
all right. Let me say. Well, I grew up in Uganda and in Tanzania, and when I was growing up in Tanzania, I think I was around 11 or 12. When I started going to the, it was called the, I think, United States Information Service. And they had all sorts of publications from all over the world. So I started reading papers, magazines from all over the world. And what I found was always consistent, the reference to Africans and African settings and situations as tribal, the T word. So, you know, that started bothering me when I was 12 years old. And that's how I became interested in media, representations of the so-called other.
Right.
And so journalism was not actually my first, I wanted to go to film school. But then my dad said, listen, if I'm paying, you know, it's got to be something real. So my first degree was actually in economics at Syracuse University. I came to the States. I went to Syracuse. I did a master's in economics, but I found myself writing letters to the editor, always outraged, man.
Were your parents involved in media or economics or politics?
Politics. My father was one of the first generation of Africans that fought for independence. By the way, I'm sweating a lot. Is it kind of hot here?
Yeah, we'll help. Yeah. I'm sorry. You know, the lights are like the lights are intense in here. You're right.
But yeah,
we'll turn on a fan. Do you need another? You want another towel or something?
Okay, towel.
Yeah, we'll take a towel. Sorry, I'm not trying to torture guests on this program.
Yeah. So my father
was. We can get the man more water.
One of those Africans that fought British colonial rule when they were still in their 20s.
Right.
He was Uganda's, I think, second ambassador to the U.S. He was barely in his 30s,
Wow.
So he was always active in politics, Uganda's politics with the turbulence as well.
Are you feeling that fan?
A little bit.
All right. Well, let's get the man the
it's
paper
coming.
towel.
It's coming.
Okay.
It's coming. But I loved reading.
Yeah.
I love reading. So when my family lived in the U.S. when I was like 5 or 6 years old, up to like age 8 or 9, and then Idi Amin, the infamous Idi Amin, came to power.
Infamous
Uganda.
Idi Amin. People know Idi Amin. I mean, in some ways, it's funny because obviously he was a truly horrible man, but it's almost like this. People will know him from Last King of Scotland.
Yes.
Kind of very sort of theatrical representation of this guy.
Yeah, overly theatrical.
Yeah.
And people don't know actually that the reason why Idi Amin came to power was because the president before him, Milton Obote, was tight with the president of Tanzania, who was socialist. So the British feared that, hey, we're going to have another socialist president in East Africa. Kenya was 100% pro-West capitalist. Tanzania under Julius Nyerere was socialist, very respected leader. And Obote was starting to lean left as well. So the British and Israel actually helped install Amin in power because he was the commander of the army at that time. And he had been like or so they thought, very obedient colonial officer before Uganda became independent. So they thought, this is our guy in Uganda, in East Africa.
Right.
He turned against them later on and against pretty much everybody else.
Right.
So anyway, my family had to get out of Uganda in a hurry. So we went to Tanzania, where we lived under, I would say, very extremely modest means. But one thing that my father always said yes to, whenever I wanted money, was to buy books. So I started reading a lot. Started having dreams of becoming, maybe a film director, producer, and maybe a journalist one day. But as I said, my father said, hey, man, if I'm going to pay for it.
Maybe we could get another one and put some cold water on it. I'm serious. I've never. Do you think it would look?
I'm feeling good though.
No, I know
you're sweating a lot.
You're always good. You're always good. That's never in question. It's just I feel like I'm running like an Idi Amin detention center in this studio when I look over at you.
Interrogation.
Yeah, I know. It's like, so why did you want to become a journalist? So. Maybe, do you think it would look really bad if we turned off those lights behind Milton? I know it lights the shot.
No, but I like the logo, man.
The logo's not even for my show. I mean, that's Sam.
Okay.
That's the colonialist overlord of my
show.
show.
Okay, you want to turn it off. That's fine.
No. It just, I don't know if it'll make much of a difference. I know probably the main thing is the overhead.
All right, so anyway, the story picks up pace a little now. So I come to the U.S. I can't go to film school. I go to Syracuse. I study economics. I come to New York City, and I start working at the Department of Sanitation.
Oh.
They just introduced the recycling program in New York. Right. So my job was...
What years are these?
This is, I'm talking, early 90s now, or late 80s?
Okay.
So I become one of the first marketing analysts. Our job was to research companies that use recyclable products.
Right.
But I found myself writing letters to the editor, man. So all my friends probably said, listen, man, why don't you do the reasonable thing? Go to journalism school and become a journalist so you can actually influence, have some impact, instead of writing letters that, 1 out of 50 gets published.
Right.
So I followed that advice. I went back to school. I went to Columbia Journalism for the 1-year master's program.
Right.
After that, I did the internship at the Wall Street Journal, and then I started working as a freelance reporter for the New York Times as a stringer, doing Metro Desk News, covering crime and grime and all that stuff. But I discovered a paper called the City Sun. It was a Brooklyn-based weekly put out by this real journalist, this older man, Andy Cooper, a black-owned paper. I couldn't believe the kind of stuff they were doing, serious investigative journalism. I called him. I said, listen, I want to be a part of this. He said, listen, how much do they pay you? I told him, he said, I can't give you 25% of that.
Wow.
I mean, the Times, pays well. Even
Right.
Stringer's pays well.
Right.
I said, it's not only about the
I'm
money.
going to do one
Sure,
more
sure. Please.
intervention on this.
Please.
So that light is shaking in a way that looks scary. So what I propose in the innovation sphere right now, maybe we can move the fan over so it could hit him directly. We could plug it in over here. Would that work?
It's beginning to feel really good.
Well, no, we won't. Don't worry. It's going to feel even better. But I'm just scared because that is shaking.
And it could start something, right?
Yeah. So we'd
have to leave in a hurry.
Maybe we could. Yeah, that would be DIY, folks. Is it okay, guys?
Yeah, you can go for it.
All right, thanks. So, yeah, we could just plug it in. And I don't think it's not going to be.
You're fine.
It's not going to be in the core. It's not going to shoot on any other lights, right? It could just go directly on him. It could get plugged in right next. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, please.
All right,
proceed.
so where are we? Okay, so...
so he said he could pay you a 25th
yeah,
of what...
25% of what I was getting.
25% of what you're
As
getting
at Metro Desk.
at Metro Desk at the
Times.
New York Times.
But listen, they were doing real journalism. And as you know, in this profession, really, you have to care about the story. You have to care about issues. If it's only about the money, then it's not, if I wanted to make money, I could have, In fact, I'll tell you a funny story. Before I went to the J school, I was thinking, well, money's not such a bad thing either. So I interviewed with this investment bank.
Right.
And after the interview, the guy said, man, I love it. You're good. Normally, people buy their books to take I think it's called the Series 7 or whatever. But I'm going to give you my books.
Oh, wow.
And I'm going to, pay for your, the licensing exam and all that. He said, you have this cold, detached look, and I love that. So I took his books, and he's shaking my hand. Said, well, we're going to make money, man. You're going to, come on. So the following Monday, I came back to him.
Yeah.
I said, listen, I'm bringing your books back. Wow. What are you talking about? I said, this isn't me. He said, what are you talking about? You're good. You're going to make money. I realized that it's not just about the money.
Right.
I really cared about the issues, and that's why I went to the City Sun. We did many great stories of the City Sun. And then Cooper was kind of older. He was in his 60s. Then when he hit 70, he started getting strokes.
Right.
Eventually he passed away, and the great paper passed away with him. And that's part of the problem with a lot of these like mom and pop type,
right.
I started kind of businesses. It's hard to have a structure that can sustain itself when the founder dies. So when he died, I said to myself, you know what? I can't go back to the Times. The money's there. And eventually, hey, maybe, you'll get on staff.
Right.
But then I realized that's not really what I want. I want to continue the kind of stories Cooper was doing and the folks that he was serving, the folks whose stories are rarely told by the so-called, mainstream corporate media.
Right.
So I sat down. How did the business end? The marshals came one day when we were still there, the staff at the City Sun, about 12 of us. Marshals said, you guys got to leave. So what do you mean? Is there a fire in the building? I said, no, you got to leave. We couldn't even pack our stuff. The paper was shut down.
Jesus.
Apparently, it owed we didn't know, months and months of rent. So that's how the City Sun ended.
Right.
I sat down as soon as I walked out.
What year is that?
Minus my belongings. This is like 97.
Okay, so 97.
Right.
All right.
I sat down and I just started writing a business plan. And I started sending it out to folks that had money. And I started thinking of a name of a publication. And then obviously, I consider myself very Pan-African. I was always inspired by Marcus Garvey, by Malcolm X, by Kwame Nkrumah, by all those Pan-Africans. So I came up with the name, the Black Star News, and I started sending the business plan that I had ready in a couple of days.
So you were
people.
like going to look to Jack Welch, guys like that.
Actually, more like
yeah, totally.
I tried folks like Oprah.
Right.
I
right,
did
right.
Michael Jordan.
Right. He's not going to help you.
Yeah. I sent it to about 50 or so people.
Yeah.
And then I started working for this. What was it called? It was one of these trade publications.
Right.
covering insurance industry, because you need income, right?
Yeah.
I did that for about maybe 4 or 5 months. And then one day I come home, I see this envelope, it looks like the one with the windows, so it looks like a bill. So I didn't open it for a couple of days.
Yeah, of course.
I think I opened it maybe like a week later.
Maybe you accidentally take it back to the New York recycling program that you helped set up. Yep.
I opened it, and it was a check for like $20K.
Wow.
It was from Camille Cosby. It was songs by Camille Cosby.
Wow.
And I had sent them, the same business plan with nothing, just like a short note saying, this is a donation from Camille Cosby.
And you were maybe expecting like a representative for somebody these people might say like, hey, this is interesting. We can set up a meeting.
No. I got lots of letters like that. This is interesting. Good luck. I got those are the letters.
Good luck. Well, good luck is bullshit. But okay. So So you got those kind of nonsense things. Right. And then you just get a check.
Oh, yeah. I got the $20K. Said, hey, let me start small. So I kept my other job for a while. Started as a monthly.
Right.
And then I think I got my first ad from a bank. I don't think it exists anymore. It used to be in downtown Brooklyn. I'm trying to remember the name. I can't remember. But anyway, he used to advertise in the City Sun.
Right.
So I kept sending him copies of my new publication. And after about 4 or 5 issues, he called me. I met him. We chatted. And he started buying full-page ads. So from that, I took that to other companies. I started getting some movie ads. Eventually, I went weekly, and I kept sending monthly copies to Camille Cosby too. And she hit me like 2 more times, 20, for a total of about 60, if not 80, K.
Something else.
That's
I mean, I remember because I heard this story before, and it's a great story.
Yeah,
and
that's how we started Black Star.
The paradox of people. I mean, the Cosby name does not.
Listen, the world.
Yeah.
Hey.
But wow, that's an incredible. So, and then kind of like, I read Black Star News. I have you on to talk, and I think on both shows. You are definitely, and correct me if I'm wrong because it's my interpretation, but I think it's like the politics that you're bringing to the world of this sort of like, to me, this kind of Pan-African politics, which is very much, in my reading, going back to like the 60s and the kind of great sort of founding fathers and liberation leaders of Africa. Yeah. And then also a real synthesized with like a global humanitarian social democratic ethic. That's just,
thank you.
It's fused in such a way that's the type of work that's inspired me. When I read someone like a C.L.R. James, it reminds me of what you're doing.
The Black Jacobins.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, all of that.
I've read that like 5 times.
Right.
And, the kind of books you read with a smile,
Right.
Yeah.
What other books do you read with a smile?
You don't want it to end. I'm reading The Soul of Black Folks now. And that's another book that you read with a smile. I read it a long time ago. Now I'm reading it like I never read it before, And as each chapter ends, you're getting closer towards finishing the book. So I'm happy, but I'm already disappointed that it's going to end soon.
Right.
I love reading books like that. But go ahead. I didn't mean to cut.
No. That's perfect. That's what it is. What have you? Let's move then a little bit in though to something that you did want to talk about, which is important, obviously, and can reflect on, because the paper still lives.
Yeah.
The paper is still, it's online.
Right.
I've been honored to be published in it. It has a lot of very important voices, including, really, it's funny, when we did your illicit history on Thomas Sankara, and Matt and I were talking after, and we were sort of, I'm not proud to say it was in the context of bad-mouthing a lot of other people, whose names I will not put out right now. But we were like, yeah, why the fuck, so-and-so has a podcast, and that's mediocre, and this person, da-da-da-da. And then Matt goes, you know who needs a podcast? And he said it just like that, too. He puts his finger up. You know who needs a podcast? Milton Allimadi needs a podcast.
Really? Okay.
Yes. Oh, my God. Because it's just, the historical foundation and the sweep behind it is so distinct. And also, coverage of Africa that
Yeah.
isn't either trivializing. I mean, and now it's weird. Actually, before we get to Libya, maybe I ask you this question.
Right.
It seems to me, and I even have some awareness of this, although it's shifted in the last several years. When I was sort of coming up and first kind of following the news in the aughts, yes, I think still primarily Africa was covered as a poverty case.
Absolutely.
Plus Nelson Mandela.
Right.
And then it was a field for, Bush and Clinton and Blair and Gordon Brown to sort of settle how compassionate they were. That was the site of compassion, even though it was also the site of militarism, obviously.
Absolutely.
But now we have on the flip side this kind of, oh, well, Africa's booming. Africa's the new, capitalist success story, even as it's in some ways, okay, that's an improvement because it recognizes the economic and intellectual assets of Africa. But at the same time, it's still many of the same systems and policies so how are you tracking that shift in coverage, but also potentially reinforcing the same patterns of exploitation?
Yeah, you're right. When you start hearing the stories about the booming Africa, the 7 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies in the last 10 years, African countries, but it masks a lot of things. It masks the fact that the primary beneficiaries are, of course, the multinational companies that are involved in resource extraction in African countries. So when they talk about booming, it means more revenue is coming in from selling, raw materials. There's what they call a commodity price boom, right? But the beneficiaries are the countries that are getting these resources to use, because obviously, if you're buying it at a higher price, it means you're making a lot more profit from whatever you produce and sell, right? The beneficiaries in the African countries are not the masses, they are the elite power structure. I think the best way to actually compare it is to say, like, the new ruling class in African countries are no longer the European colonials. Now, they've been replaced by Africans, the African elite. But the system, the economic system and structure is the same as what was set up during the colonial era. So you have the elite extracting resources from the masses, whether they're the farmers in the rural areas, who still get the same kind of margin. In terms of the absolute pie, they get the same slice that they were getting during European colonial rule. So the European elite have now been replaced by African elites in most of these countries. So those are the beneficiaries of these 7 fast-growing economies. It doesn't really trickle down to the rural areas. So, for example, you talk about like a country like Uganda, where economic growth could be at one point at least one of the highest also in Africa, but you find that hospitals have no medicines, right? Because that's not the elite. Either have private clinics, or, as in the case of the president, the dictator I call him, when his daughter was about to deliver, they didn't want to take chances. So she was flown in his Gulfstream jet, which was bought for $50 million with foreign aid money, right? She was flown to Germany to deliver and then flown back to Uganda. While the rest, I'll give you the flip side of the story. Yeah. And people who are listening could actually Google and look up the story. A hospital in Uganda in a town called Moroto, Moroto. In that hospital, if you look at it, there's a picture in that. There's an article in a paper called the Daily Monitor, which is an independent paper in Uganda. It looks like any hospital in a modern hospital in any country. But inside, because the staff is not getting paid, when patients died, they would remain on the hospital beds for 3 or 4 days, bodies uncollected. It's like a horror movie,
right?
And hard to believe. That's why I want people to look it up and read the story. So obviously, the other patients who are alive can't stay in the same hospital, so they were sleeping outside beneath trees. Imagine,
right?
And this is like the contradiction.
Right.
Of this so-called economic boom. And I give this as an example, and of course you can imagine that it's occurring, in other African countries. It's not always this extreme, But this is an extreme example of the elite absorbing it all, and the folks at the grassroots not getting it. The same thing for schools, like schools with no supplies, and the roads with potholes and all that.
I mean, the Marxist in me says that that's because there was, movement. I mean, there are two systems of oppression, racial and economic, and they're both vital to overthrow, but that if you didn't include economic democratization and decentralization, then the system's only going to replicate itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's been the harsh reality. And then, of course, you had countries like Tanzania under Julius Nyerere.
Talk about that, please.
Who was socialist, one of the most respected. He was an intellectual. He was a writer. He translated Shakespeare into Kiswahili, which is the national language in Tanzania, and also regional language spoken in many African countries. But so he was appreciated and loved for that aspect. But when it came to his economics, the West was very hostile to him, and he was trying to implement a more socialist system in Tanzania. One thing that Nyerere was able to bequeath to his country was a sense of nationalism and cohesiveness. So Tanzania, unlike many African countries, doesn't have that kind of ethnic rift that you see in many African countries, which is clear evidence that the so-called, and I hate to use the T word when you see people call about tribal conflict, that's just when people abuse regional and ethnic differences for political advantage.
Will you dive into that more? Because this is because tribalism, and we will use the word and kind of spell it out. Is that the product of classification systems of colonial administrations and divide and conquer politics, which you see across all colonized spaces? Or is it, as it's represented here, this undying, mystical, innate thing, which I feel like is what you're pointing to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm pointing to. But when I refer to the T word, it is, and I'll give you a couple of examples. It's when, for example, let's take Rwanda.
Right.
The 1994 genocide, massacres. I remember Time magazine had an article said it was due to tribal bloodlust. So that's like, when somebody says it's tribal bloodlust, you don't need any more explanation after that.
Right. What more do you need to know?
Understand. Like, come on. Okay.
Right.
Africa, tribal bloodlust.
Right.
I get it.
I think we understand what's going on here.
People just woke up one day. I'm Hutu. I'm Tutsi. Hey, I'm going to chop your head off, even though I wasn't doing it yesterday, or the week before, or the month before. Right. So, but nobody has time to ask that question. Why is it happening now?
Right.
It has a long kind of history, but I think it's worth maybe spending a couple of minutes on it.
Yeah, please.
During the colonial rule in what was Rwanda, Urundi, now separate countries, Rwanda, Burundi, under the Belgians, they found there existed a system where the Tutsi were the ruling class and Hutu were more the farmers. It was not, the schism was not as vicious as it became later on. During Belgian colonial rule, it was reinforced and exacerbated so that by the time of the revolution of 1960, the tension was so high that when the majority population, which is the Hutu, took control and overthrew the monarchy, there was a lot of retribution against Tutsi. So they fled into exile, and many of them went to neighboring countries like Uganda. So their offspring grew up in the regional countries, including Uganda. And then in 1980, in Uganda, the current ruler, Yoweri Museveni, when he ran for elections, he didn't do that well. In fact, he didn't win a seat in parliament. So he launched an armed insurgency, and he recruited the offspring of the Tutsi who had fled in the 1960s to Uganda. So they formed like a large component of his army. So he was successfully overthrew the government of Milton Obote in actually Obote was overthrown by his army, and then Museveni he reached an accommodation with the new junta, but then he overthrew them and he became the man in charge. This is 86.
Not a team player.
No, he's always been, I'm the team.
That's to be the name of our new podcast, Milton and Michael. I'm the team.
I like that. So the young Tutsi who had helped Museveni come to power, they started training themselves now with an eye toward returning to Rwanda.
Right.
And in 1990, he supported them in invading the country.
Right.
So basically, it was the Ugandan army, because they were members of the Ugandan army. They were officers, in fact. Paul Kagame, who's the ruler of
current
Rwanda
president
today,
or ruler
was
of
the
Rwanda.
chief of military intelligence in Uganda's army. So they basically just like 5,000 of them just, crossed the border and invaded.
Right.
So this led to the war, and that's when the killings really started, the massacres. It was not being reported from 1990 to 1994. And then when the plane carrying the president of Rwanda, Juvenal Habyarimana, and the president of neighboring Burundi, Cyprien Taramire, was shot down, and both of them were Hutu as well. So you can imagine, I always give people the example of, imagine India and Pakistan. Let's say Pakistan were to finance, train, and arm an insurgency of Muslim fighters.
And they do this.
And they come to India and they fight for a couple of years. And during that period, you know how the religious and ethnic thing would just explode into these kind of killings. And then imagine the Hindu president of India being shot down. At that point, no one would even care who shot the president down. So that was
well,
comparable.
Indira Gandhi. I mean, this story, right? Like it tracks exactly. She was assassinated by one of her bodyguards.
And imagine if it had happened during a really armed war between two countries.
It wasn't armed, but there was an armed insurgency in Sikh areas. They assassinated her, and then there was mass killing of Sikhs in India. Like a couple of thousand people were killed in a matter of days. And her son said something like, if you, I'm paraphrasing, but something to the effect of like, if you poke the tiger, it will react. That was the response. And you're talking about children being burned alive. I mean, it was really, and I think that's the other part of it, is we're not you're in no way justifying.
Of course
you're saying
not.
there's always a context.
Absolutely.
And then that number two, all of these things could be whipped up anywhere.
Yeah.
Where else is xenophobia and the lizard brain of humanity not readily accessible?
Yeah. But then, also by just dismissing it as tribal, you don't have to answer a lot of questions now.
Right.
The fact that, I forgot what year now, the New York Times came out with a story that said the missile that shot down the plane was I forget where it was captured from, but then it was supplied by, I think it was, the story said it was captured from a Iraqi stockpile after the first Gulf War, to expel Saddam from Kuwait.
Right.
And that the U.S. provided that missile to Uganda, Museveni, who then provided it to Paul Kagame. Of course, the State Department denied it, the Pentagon denied it, but anybody can look up the story too.
Right.
Yeah. But if you look at the denial really carefully, the denial said, something like, I'm paraphrasing, something, it's preposterous to suggest that we provided the missile to the people that shot down the plane. Okay, that could be true. But if you provided it to Museveni, he's not the one that shot down the plane.
Right.
He could have then provided it. So the denial actually left like a little bit of a.
Well, you can always, if you have any, I mean, don't have the fraction of your experience, but if you have any time putting into those State Department statements, or the statement of any foreign policy of any major government, you can very quickly find those angles. Yeah. So what we're going to do now, and then we'll loop back because we will cover Libya in the time we have. But I do want to play this clip because, and this is a very, as Waz would say, there's a lot of brain food in this post game for Michael Brooks Show patrons. This show has a historical arc to it, and we're trying to, even though we cover things obviously of what's happening now, the premium content has a sort of, we're trying to give people the context for understanding what's happening now. And one of the things that we're working on, part of the project, is destroying the alt-right. And also, Bree Joy and I were talking about the distinction between quote-unquote respectability politics, which is a problem, versus also just being aware, though, that everybody is a brand, whether you like it or not. And so we wanted to play this clip of Malcolm X from the 1960s, sort of devastating a certain type of argument. And then if you wouldn't mind, I'd like you to run us through what we can learn from it today.
One white man named Lincoln supposedly fought the Civil War to solve the race problem, and the problem is still here. Another white man named Lincoln, again the same white man, issued the Emancipation Proclamation to solve the race problem, and the problem is still here. Some more white liberals came along with the 13th, 14th, and 5th Amendments, which were supposed to solve the race problem. The problem is still here. 9 years ago, 9 more white liberals, so-called, came up with what they call a Supreme Court desegregation decision, and the problem is still here. And then another white man named Kennedy came along running for president and told Negroes what all he was going to do for them if they voted for him, and they voted for him 80%. He's been in office now for 3 years, and the problem is still here. When police dogs were biting black women and black children and black babies in Birmingham, Alabama, that Kennedy talked about what he couldn't do because no federal law had been violated. And as soon as the Negroes exploded and began to protect themselves and got the best of the crackers in Birmingham, then Kennedy sent for the troops. And there was no, he didn't have any new law when he sent for the troops when the Negroes erupted than he had at the time when whites were erupting. So we are within our rights and with justice, with justification, when we express doubt concerning the ability of the white man to solve our problem, and also when we express doubt concerning his integrity, concerning his sincerity, because you will have to confess that the problem has been around here for a long time, and whites have been saying the same thing about it for the past 100 years, and it's no nearer a solution today than it was 100 years ago.
So what do you think about that?
I think it's absolutely 100% correct. I listen to a little bit of Malcolm every day. My belly may look a little flabby now, but I do some sit-ups every day.
It doesn't look flabby, man.
And when I'm doing
sit-ups, you don't gotta reveal yourself. You look tight.
When I'm doing sit-ups, I listen to Malcolm.
Oh, that's a good strategy.
There's tons of Malcolm on YouTube. I listen to the Oxford Union debate, and he's talking to almost exclusively white, some of the best brains at Oxford. And he's making the similar argument. And he's basically saying that, in fact, we would find many more authentic white allies if we spoke the truth.
Right.
Instead of this wishy-washy, love thy neighbor, even when your neighbor's beating down women, as he said, hosing them down till the clothes rip off their bodies, killing them. And he said, how can somebody take you seriously unless you really say the truth? And the truth is, you have a right to defend yourself against such actions. And the more black folk that speak out like that, the more credibility they have,
right,
and the more authentic allies they have. And then he said to the Oxford Union student, he said, and if I'm wrong, it means you're racist. And all of them were like kind of cracking up. But I strongly recommend that particular clip. People should go back and watch that Oxford Union debate.
We'll do it.
Malcolm X.
Yeah.
And his audience, you could tell by the reaction, they were relating and identifying with what he was saying.
Right.
they may never have heard it before, put that way, you know. At that time, he was still using the term Negro because it was commonly used during those days. So to them, seeing actually Malcolm used to say so-called Negro. So seeing a so-called Negro speaking so bravely, without varnishing the truth or how he felt, I think they learned a lot from them. They respected him, and you could see just by the applause he was getting. And I think that's why he resonated, really. There's another great, the Ballad of the Bullet.
Right.
That's the one that I listen to at least 2 or 3 times a week when I'm doing my sit-ups.
Which are working.
And I think he covers a whole range of issues there. He covers black economic empowerment. And you could tell, you could sense, that one is only audio, but you can tell by the reaction, right? By listening to the reaction, that he was saying things that a lot of black folk were not used to hearing coming from another black man. Saying, for example, I don't get it. You take your money from your neighborhood and you go spend it in some other neighborhood. The folks that own the businesses in your neighborhood take the money out of your neighborhood. And then at the end of the day, you complain that you're living in the ghettos. He said, you're out of your mind. You're the one who's causing your place to become a ghetto. And you can tell people actually loving to hear something like that, but at the same time, it's elevating their consciousness. And he says, what you need to do is to learn how to do business. Says big companies like, I forget whether they use a GM or Ford. They didn't start off like a big company like that. They started like a little rat race. And now they're global companies, So you need to learn how to create a business. A black man needs to learn how to create a business and then create employment for people in your community. And then when you create employment, you don't have to go picketing around begging somebody to give you a job.
I have a couple of thoughts about that and one question. I mean, one that I noticed that's really interesting is that it's so direct. So even some people across the somewhat ideological spectrum or racial spectrum who are still kind of would like to consider themselves occupying that slot today, they're filled with verbiage. They might be as angry. They might do the same. They might try to do rhetorical flourishes, but it's so intelligent, but it's so clean. It's so crisp. It's so direct.
Yeah.
The other thing that I noticed that's interesting, and I also think like there's this interesting sort of, there's sort of like white bigotry and white delusion, which is a very real thing. But then there's this kind of like white performative wokeness, which is very annoying. And I wonder what he's pointing to there. I've had the honor of interviewing Ronnie Casseroles a bunch of times. Who's literally a African liberation leader, right? And his background's Jewish. But the way it's like he just sort of got on with it. He was a socialist and he's a fighter against apartheid. And that was it. And these men he fought with and these women he fought with were his colleagues and his comrades. And it's so direct and it's so no bullshit. And I wonder if there's something in the bluntness of it that we're missing today across the board. The emotional ability of white people to not get all freaked out and defensive, but also the ability of everybody to use less verbiage and less bullshit and less and just go to it. And the third point I wondered with regards to the economics, I mean, I'm more persuaded, by him as he went towards the end of his career, not just because people make the point that, yes, he did transition to a more sort of not just Orthodox Islam, but I would say a kind of a global socialist outlook. And then his rhetoric started becoming not only transracial, which is important, I think, ultimately in terms of broader political goals, but also in terms of really understanding economic production and being like, you can't just start your own business to supplant because it's systemically deprived from certain communities, and that's a market function.
I'm glad you brought that up. And I think one of the best global aspects, I think it's a message to the grassroots. when you can tell that, oh yes, now he has a grasp of the global geopolitics and economics, how big capital dictates the terms of economic relationship, which then influences the political conditions and the kind of regimes that we support in those countries,
right,
and how they maintain the power structure.
Right.
That was brilliant, and I'm so disappointed that that did not come out in a book, and that's something that I actually have thoughts of
Maybe
at
you
some
have
point.
to write it.
Tackling in the
Maybe you
future.
have to write
No,
it.
really, because
Yeah.
he showed brilliant understanding. I mean, one of the best books, of course, is still the autobiography, but I think that does not contain enough.
Do you think Manning Marabell got to some of this in his biography that came out a couple of years ago?
I don't think he addressed that aspect. I think
Yeah.
that aspect
Yeah.
deserves a book in
Yes,
itself. Just
I
his
agree.
economic outlook.
Yeah. I agree.
I hope somebody isn't listening and starts working on it before I do. But I think
You hear that, patrons? That's from Milton. Don't mess around.
no, that really deserves. He showed an understanding of that. So much so that many of the other prominent black leaders of his generation.
Well, he globally integrated it.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
somebody
kind of-
else who
yeah,
made
and
us.
also the class.
Yeah.
But anyway,
And
sorry.
also
yeah.
his mastery of language and how
Yes.
to relate, his relatability.
Yes.
To relatability to folks when he was speaking in Harlem, in Detroit,
Yeah.
and then at the Oxford Union. People should go and look at those various tapes, and they'll see what I mean.
Well, different rhetoric, but same charisma.
There you go.
I mean,
Yeah.
the charisma's always there.
The Oxford Union, there's a shorter version, which is like 13 minutes. You can start off with that, but then go to the longer version, which is like the complete Oxford Union debate, which is like, I think, about maybe an hour and a half or so, and that's worth it as well. And then he talks about the media and his understanding of how media are used to manipulate conditions. He said, for example, the Congo, where media was used to demonize Patrice Lumumba and to glorify Moise Tshombe, who was installed by the Belgians and the U.S. In Katanga, to break away from the central government, and that exacerbated the rift with Lumumba, and then they brought in Mobutu, who handed over Lumumba to be executed by Tshombe, and people can, I think it was very well depicted in Raoul Peck's film Lumumba.
Yeah, that's a great film.
Yeah,
Everybody
a few
should
years
watch
ago.
that film.
But Malcolm
yeah,
analyzed
please.
that. He said,
Yeah.
so here you see how, and said, you look at the words they use to describe, Tshombe, and the words they use to describe Lumumba. So the criminal
Right.
is glorified, and the true prime minister who was elected,
Yeah.
nobody elected Tshombe, right? The one who was elected is the one who is demonized.
Right.
And then when they talk about U.S. trained mercenaries, to give it some positivity because they're U.S. trained, when in fact they're criminals killing unarmed people, civilians in the Congo.
Yeah, they're murderers.
Yeah, it's just remarkable, his analysis.
Yeah, his
of
acuity,
media.
and I would really encourage. I mean, I think people have he's been made a caricature by including people who love him, but people need to dig into
Yeah.
him because he's not.
Yeah.
This is a world-class
Yeah.
thinker
Yeah,
and
yeah,
leader.
absolutely,
I mean,
absolutely.
and it's
not
kind of
not
really
it's so
exceptional.
easy to just pump up the
Right,
fist,
right.
But it's harder work to actually get down to it, analyze, critique, and he was good at that.
Yes.
It's hard to believe he was not formally schooled, but actually he was kind of formally schooled informally,
Well, as a
had-
homeschooler and an autodidact, I totally believe it.
Yeah, okay,
my,
see?
my college degree
Right.
was kind of secondary
yeah,
at the end of the day.
Like-
But we have some IMs and some questions from the Discord, which we're going to get to, but in the last 10 minutes or so.
Sure.
But before we get to that, I know you wanted to talk about and give us just a brief background and then the crisis today that we need to address, and we will continue to address.
Sure.
And we'll have you hopefully on the main show soon as well.
Sure.
Libya.
Yes, Libya. So Libya, once again in the news since, 2 weeks ago, when the CNN video went viral, right? Showing the auction, right?
Explain that to people. I mean, most people probably know, but not everybody.
Right. Well, it says it's showing an auction of Africans, and you see the arm of an individual of a pale complexion. So, maybe an Arab, and you don't see the people that are bidding, but you can hear the bids being stated, uttered. So I was very disappointed in many ways, but not surprised that it had come down to that.
Yeah.
Because during the NATO war on Libya, the very racist aspect of the insurgents was really totally ignored or just glossed over by most of the major corporate media.
Explain that, please.
Okay. So, for example, the insurgents, especially the ones from Misrata, the city of Misrata, were targeting black Libyans and migrant workers from other African countries. Horrific killings, lynchings, beheadings, and these were being posted on YouTube. So we were writing editorials about it. Said, why are we supporting these guys? How can you hope that if they seize power, these are the guys that are actually going to create a new dispensation in Libya?
Right.
The Wall Street Journal, to its credit, actually did a couple of very compelling articles, and I invite people to look up. The reporter's name is Sam Dagher, Dagher. And in one of his articles, he wrote that the city of Tawaga in Libya, which was populated by black Libyans, population about 40,000, was completely depopulated, right? So they were people killed and most fled. And on the buildings that they burned down their homes, and they were writing the words like slaves on the buildings that were burned down. And he also said that one of the brigades that was leading this attack was called the Brigade to Purge Slaves, Black Skin. So you wonder, why aren't you seeing a story like this in a major publication like the New York Times?
Right.
Why aren't you seeing it on CNN?
Right.
BBC? So my conviction was that because it was inconvenient news, people would start asking questions. Wait, are these our insurgents? These are our heroes that we want to install in power in Libya? Can you imagine how black journalists, opinion shapers, black members of Congress, or any conscious person who cares, doesn't have to be black?
I mean, that's a pretty fucking low bar.
Think about that.
Excuse my language. But
Think about that.
Yeah.
So I think that's why that story was censored. The media self-censored, right? The Wall Street Journal wrote a couple of articles. And let me tell you what ultimately happened. We must have written like 50 plus editorials. We were writing editorials almost every day on Libya during the height of the conflict. One editorial in particular, we posted on September the 4th, 2011. And the headline was, because that day, I think the day before, the New York Times had finally written an article about the whole ethnic targeting.
Right.
So we wrote, the headline was, New York Times finally writes about ethnic targeting of black Libyans months later. Long headline like that. And we urge people to call the editorial page, ask them why they hadn't been doing enough stories on an issue like this. Call, and we posted the phone numbers. Call the White House, call the State Department, call the NAACP, call the Urban League. Because believe me, I had been calling them myself too.
Of course.
And not getting any comments, by the way. And then that editorial, our website on the same day, we couldn't access our website. So you go to blackstarnews.com, you just get like a blank. So we contact our host, Network Solutions. So what's going on? It's just a technical problem. Okay, so the first day, possible. 2 days. The third day, I woke up like at 4 a.m. Sometimes you just wake up and you say no. So I woke up and something told me no. I called because they're 24/7. And I started taking names and titles. I don't believe you guys. I don't believe that since you host hundreds and hundreds of websites, that they can't access their website either. I don't believe it. In a few hours' time, our website was back up. So now I'm really perplexed. You think, what could be going on? So I go to the website, and that editorial, the one I just discussed right now, had been deleted from our website. Can you imagine?
That's so
somebody having enough interest in a particular editorial and enough clout to actually get it deleted from your website. And then they handed the website back to us. Here, take it now, minus that particular editorial.
Did you put the article back up?
No, we did, and we wrote another editorial saying the Libya editorial somebody doesn't want you to to read. And we explained what had happened over the last 3 days and how it came back on after I called and I said, I don't believe you guys. And then we reposted that same editorial. But if you went to, like, many other websites ran the same editorial. If you went to their websites and then you click to the link on the Black Star, it would take you to a blank page because obviously we had to repost it as a new editorial now.
Right.
So that was our experience with that. So then I became very convinced that, you know, there are elements that don't want the word to spread. So now, obviously, when we see this thing on CNN.
Yeah, now it's getting a little bit of coverage. Actually, a friend of this show, Mike Hanna, did a really good report on it for Al Jazeera. So there's a little bit of energy on it.
Right. So my question is, so in our case, it was not surprising that things could reach this level because you didn't criticize them when they were doing it then because you were supporting them. Did you think overnight it was going to get better?
Right.
Obviously not. Conditions became worse because you sort of condoned it by totally ignoring it when you were supporting the insurgency.
And so, well, we're going to do another show on Gaddafi and the contextualization and horrors of him and how I think in some ways how he leveraged race himself added to it because he was on PayPal bringing in chatty fighters. And I mean, it's just the racial dynamics of it, though, that nobody talks about. So let me read. I'm going to read a few comments from the IM and a few of things from the Discord.
Sure.
Okay. Thames Darwin. MJ, this is about, I don't know if you know, but Mike Cernovich, who is a horrible alt-right kind of character.
Yeah.
He's the exact opposite of you in every way, shape, and form. He basically he sort of willfully misread a tweet of Sam from 2009 satirizing people defending Roman Polanski, and so Sam has been fired from MSNBC as a result of this. So
really?
We've been sort of going over the kind of fallout of that.
Yeah.
So Thames Darwin. MJ, I guess that's for my middle name, which is, of course, Jamal.
Yeah.
MJ. Bit of an inside track on the Cerno thing. Cerno is tight with Stefan Mallieu, who Hume and Matt rightly went after years ago over his rabid misogyny. In no small coincidence, Sam debated Stefan Mallieu some years back. Mallieu met his Waterloo in challenging Sam. Wait for it, the Social Security Trust Fund. I think that the dude doesn't. I think that dude doesn't. Hard to think that dude doesn't have a hard on for Sam. Stefan Mallieu is an incredibly bizarre internet libertarian. He's now going very hard on the IQ bunk and quote-unquote race science, which we're working on with this show. It's just
he might be just distasteful enough to debunk that stuff himself.
I think right. He's like the Charlie Rangel quote. Like Charlie Rangel said, George Bush disproves white supremacy every day or something. Like that's like what Stefan Mallieu does. Like, you really have to construct quite a system where he's a superior end of any of it. But so he is, yes, and he is a really disgusting character. And I'd also look up Stefan Mallieu and cults because there's some interesting questions and reporting about the
some vibes
communities that he may be trying to set up in Canada. Cult vibe. Masshole. Maybe a combination of hearing old Matt again or Sam being let go of MS from MSNBC or just your fucking awesomeness, Michael. But this has been the best show yet. When you're back in Western Mass, drinks on me, man. Sounds good. Although I think they're all great shows. No, I mean, we're I think the goal is always you start really strong out of the gate, and I do think we started really strong out of the gate, and then you just refine and move. Max from Maryland, I want to invite everyone listening to the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia to come to the EPW DSA General Meeting tomorrow night at 8 p.m. in the Cumberland room of the Student Center at Shepherd University. This is very specific. We're having a town hall and want to hear from the community. Respect. Huge mistake. Ayatollah Trump to declare support for local cleric of the ethnic tribe known as white evangelicals. Roy Moore against local opposition leader of the IE centrist Cockstuck Jones. The main issue has become whether Moore's practice of taking child brides will hurt his chances in leading the outpost known as Alabama. I'd be very interesting to see everybody who made careers off of talking about black pathology, if they have any comments about the zeal to have an almost certain pedophile elected to the
Amazing,
Senate.
huh?
Yeah. Well, if you follow Republicans, no.
No, actually, yeah, I take that back.
Totally expected.
Unamazing.
Yeah. Sort of like being like, hey, could you believe Museveni sent his daughter to Germany? Yes.
It's like Steph Curry hit another 3-pointer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's good
How
at
does
it.
he do it? I don't know. He just does it all the time. A few things from the Discord. And maybe, actually, I have not followed this closely enough. I want to do a follow-up on it. Milton might have a thought on it. Do you have any comment on what's going on in Honduras right now?
No.
Okay, so Honduras, there's a disputed election there right now. There's U.S.-trained forces, I believe, or U.S.-trained... there's some logistics from the United States. We backed a coup there, at least informally, in 2009, which got rid of a President Zelaya.
Yeah.
And we also, another story which I covered about a year ago, was a murdered environmental activist. I'm forgetting her name at the moment. But there was a Honduran Special Forces operative who fled to Mexico, who said that he was part of a hit squad that was taking orders to kill people like her, and he in fact didn't feel comfortable with that order with her specifically, I believe, so he left. That was the coup we supported in 2009. Let's see. Thank you and fuck Thurnovich. This guy is a weird. I mean, I wouldn't make fun of people with speech impediments, but I do make fun of a guy who built his whole career on pretending to be some type of alpha male pickup figure living off of a much more successful wife's alimony. And then I just happen to do an accurate impression of him. What can I do? It's just, you want me to do Obama? It'll sound good. No, I'm going to do Thurnovich. It's going to sound another way. Let's see. Question, thoughts on the move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem of the American Embassy? Milton?
Does it have... Is it going to have, I don't know. I mean, at this stage, does it have any?
I mean, we've already...
Does it change the balance anyhow in any direction?
I think it just formalizes the enormous disrespect and once... I mean, even under previous administrations, there had been at least a sort of occasional acknowledgement of what is in fact official U.S. policy.
Yeah.
And under this administration, unsurprisingly, that is totally
I think
gone.
that had it been... certain time in history, it might have escalated war immediately. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
But it's not going to have that kind of dramatic impact. Some psychological, ultimately, we need to address that issue in a very significant and serious way. And I don't know what it's going to take, really. But
I think it is completely...
Anything else is just... sort of like playing games, And this is like big news. You imagine. It just shows you how far away we are from, a real resolution.
I mean, even Ehud Olmert, who's a former Israeli prime minister, who I mean, terrible in many ways, but has a very intelligent guy who understood the situation. He said going back, I think, to 2005, it's going to become an apartheid state, and it is obviously an apartheid state. And he said it's incompatible with particularly younger American Jews, and actually that is starting to be borne out in polling. There is only so long.
It's unsustainable.
Look, modern ethno-states are not the answer, even for historically oppressed and genocided people, period, and that applies to everybody. We need to figure out fully flourishing democracies for people of all backgrounds, period. And then Claire says to go into the Discord and follow up on the book recommendations. That's a new vertical that's been set up. I recommended actually a book that I really loved, Thabo Mbeki, and The Legacy of Liberation, Thabo Mbeki and the Future of the South African Dream. It's one of my favorite books.
I'm gonna hit Amazon.
Fascinated by Thabo Mbeki. I would actually like to interview him on this show one of these days. Milton Allimadi, he's the publisher of Black Star News. Everybody should check him out. We'll have a link, obviously, to his Twitter. He's going to join us hopefully soon on the main show. If you haven't yet, check out in the Illicit History, Thomas Sankara, the story is the Che of Africa. This Sunday, Ken Silverstein, legendary journalist on the Illicit History. We're going to talk about his going undercover to discover the true heart of sleaziness of D.C. lobbying. He posed as a representative of a Lebanese oil guy who had a natural gas field in Turkmenistan and went to all the major D.C. lobbying groups, and they were willing to pretty much do anything to airbrush this. And Ken is a brilliant character and raconteur, and we argued, and we also talked about Russia and Manafort and a whole bunch of stuff. It's going to be great. Milton Allimadi, thank you so much. We're going to be doing much more in the future.
My pleasure.
I really, really admire, appreciate,
Malcolm, stay strong. Folks, go to YouTube. Google.
I'm honored to have you.
My
for
pleasure.
Real. Thank you.
Thank you,
Matt. Thank you, David Slavic. Thank you, David Grisham. Thank you, everybody here, for the energy. We will be back on Sunday. Keep spreading the word. Left is best.